All right, thank you, everybody. I am very excited to introduce our next guest here, Gene. So for probably the last few decades, Gene has been instrumental in helping companies get financing and go public and just grow in general in his work at Goldman. He had helped a couple of companies of ours actually raise money and go public. And what I think is important about all that is that Gene has focused a lot on technology, media, and telecommunications. Those companies are what's making a lot of the things we're talking about today even possible. So the fact that we may take for granted that we have Wi-Fi, that we have connectivity on a network, that we have a smartphone that didn't exist even 10 years ago, all those technologies need people to help finance and create those companies. And I think Gene has done a lot of that work with the team at Goldman. We're really appreciated for that. And then now in his new role at LA 2028, he's been instrumental in bringing the games back to LA, which I think we're all very, very excited about. And so we want to get right into it and talk to Gene about how what the process was like, getting the games here, because I think that's very important, because there's a reason why we think LA is a great place for the games to be hosted. But also, we have 11 years until the games are going to be here. There's going to be a significant amount of innovation that's going to happen in that 11 years. And a lot of that innovation is sitting in this room today about how players may train for the games, how they may handle their nutrition, how sports will cover the games. So we're very excited about that. And I'd like to just start by maybe telling us the story of getting the games back to LA, because it was historic.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Joe, and Dr. Saxton, thank you very much. I'm pleased to have a chance to talk to you now that we have actually been awarded the 2028 Olympic and Paralympic Games. So this is a process that began with Mayor Eric Garcetti, and he's told the story many times that the first thing that he did when he was newly elected mayor, the first term, so over 4 years ago, was to send a letter of interest to the U.S. Olympic Committee registering the excitement and desire of Los Angeles to be a candidate for the 2024 Olympic and Paralympic Games. And he enlisted Casey Wasserman, who's the chairman of our bid, and the two of them have been joined at the hip ever since. That's literally 4 years ago. The process led to the selection by the U.S. Olympic Committee, not of Los Angeles, but Boston, as the choice of the USOC to be the U.S. city in this candidacy. And Boston spent 6 months meeting all sorts of local opposition, headwinds, and they didn't exactly know what to do to deal with that. So Boston had to give up their candidacy. The USOC then came back to the mayor and to Casey and said, would you put your bid back together again? So this is the bid that was never intended to be, and it's for the games that we never intended to bid for. So there's a lot of irony in what we've ended up with now with 11 years to go, which is literally unprecedented. No city has ever had 11 years to organize the Olympic and Paralympic Games. And ironically, again, we are the one city in the world that if they said to us, can you host the Games next year, we could probably say yes. So this has been a very, very interesting experience with lots of twists and turns along the way. But we're absolutely thrilled to be in this position and look forward to 11 years of excitement and then ultimately a result that will be great for the country, great for our city, and I think it will be fantastic as well for the Olympic movement.
Gene, one of the things we worked with Marla and a lot of your athletes and Olympians thinking about how to bring body-worn sensors and other technologies to kind of light up the athletes in a way that wouldn't intrude with their own training from their specific countries. And we landed on Olympic Village as a place to tell stories. So to get a viewership that might be watching the Olympics on different screens, who knows what age, to get them interested in archery or a sport that maybe they wouldn't generally watch. When you think about watching some of these athletes or Michael Phelps listening to music, how do we sort of use sensors to light up anew as almost a media play to make the athletes more interesting? And it's challenging now because of the model of network television, the Olympics. I'm just very interested how you thought about packaging the Olympics in that regard.
Well, a big theme of our Olympic bid has been that Los Angeles is the place to have the Olympic and Paralympic Games, not only because this is where Olympic athletes live and like to train. This is the place that has the best weather. We have the best infrastructure. But that for the Olympic and Paralympic Games to be meaningful in the future, they have to relate to young people, people in the next generations. And this Los Angeles, Southern California, is the best community in the world for that because we benefit from the confluence of entertainment and media and technology. And every single player in the technology or entertainment or media field who we've spoken to about the Olympic and Paralympic Games has said to us, how can we help? We have a really good idea. Can you let us do something? And so we know that this is the area that's just sort of waiting to be developed. Intel, for example, is the newest Olympic top sponsor. So they made an agreement with the IOC to be a sponsor for all of the games through 24. Their agreement doesn't run to 28, but we'll see about that. But among the things that they've said to us, and they came to meet with us, that they want to focus on is sensors. And they've been on this for some time. They think this is how Intel can relate to the individual, to the consumer, and not just by being buried in somebody's device, but being something that brings the experience of technology alive and letting people feel and experience movement, competition, everything from perspiration to sort of victory in a way that they can only see visually or see through a traditional screen. So I think you have to have your mind very open to the ways that all sorts of technologies can change the experience. And you were very helpful to us in preparation of our bid. One of the key things we said in our bid was that the USC Center for Body Computing and the devotion you have to technology and innovation would be incorporated into our planning, both with athletes, but ultimately with spectators and participants as well.
And what was the biggest, France is very different in that regard. The picture you painted, you don't think of France, you think of LA. So how did it work for you or against you to position yourself that way? I'm just with the...
So I have a great story to tell you. The IOC sends out an evaluation commission of roughly 25 people. We prepared for this thing for months. It was a huge 3-day experience where 12 IOC members, 12 staff from all around the world descended upon us. They had told us they wanted to see everything. So every single element of what we planned to do for 2024, we showed them. They spent a lot of time at USC, they spent time at UCLA, they spent time at every other venue or intended venue, save for Lake Paris, which is where we expect to have rowing, because it was too far away. It's 75 miles east of downtown Los Angeles. But we had them going all around the community. They did the same thing with Paris just after doing the trip with us. And here are the adjectives they used for Los Angeles versus Paris. Los Angeles, mind-blowing, innovative, futuristic, exciting. Paris, iconic, historic, beautiful, spectacular. And they were diplomatic enough to say, each has its virtues. And we think both are great cities. But it reveals an awful lot about the distinctions between LA and Paris to hear them characterize it with adjectives.
Yeah. So what was the biggest lift in the whole bid, do you think? What was
The hardest part of this whole bid process, honestly, was understanding how people who don't live in the United States think about America. And how do you persuade them that they should give the Olympic Games and Paralympic Games to Americans when, in fact, from their perspective, Americans win the most medals, have the most money, have the greatest resources, seem to be a little inattentive to the interests of everybody else. And so there's a lot of active resistance to letting America host the Olympic and Paralympic Games. That's a resistance you have to learn to overcome by engaging with people, listening to them an awful lot, and being able to persuade them that there are virtues and benefits to our community that they may not understand. Again, LA has incredible assets in our people, and as the mayor says, this community has 39 countries where the second biggest population in an urban environment of people from those countries is actually in Los Angeles. So we have the greatest number of Koreans and Korean Americans, relative to any place except Seoul. 39 countries you could say that about. We have 115 languages spoken in Southern California. So we've been able to say to people from the IOC who are from all the countries of the world, your athletes can come here and feel like they're on the home team because they're going to find people from where they're from who will celebrate their success. One of the final things we did just last week when we were in Lima, Peru, when the IOC members voted to award the games for 24 and 28, was to make a presentation. The presentation included the USC alumnus, Allison Felix, who is, of course, the greatest women Olympic athlete from track and field in history. And she said one of the best experiences she's had, she said this is at the UCLA Drake Field track where she trains, is that people from all over the world train there, including her competitors from other countries. And she said, you know, I first thought I would feel that they were imposing upon me, but as I met them and spent time with them, I realized it's great that they're all here. And one of the most exciting and rewarding experiences is for Americans to see that other people will come here and participate with us. So the opportunity for us to be a host reflects the same character, same personality. And being able to persuade people from around the world that they shouldn't resent us or think of us as hostile, but think of us as welcoming, was the biggest push, as you say. And that required a lot of time and a lot of personal touch. We had to meet people and spend time with them and help them understand how we wanted to listen to them.
I think one of the things I wanted to bring up is there's the people in this room, we have a pretty big challenge in terms of digital health at all. There are a lot of components to digital health, and there's things that there's the regulation, there's the actual more medical focused things, and then there's how we're going to treat data. How is that data going to be secure? How are people going to interface with all of this information? But one thing that we think is interesting about the Olympics is that to some extent we're trying to make healthcare more consumer, and in order to make healthcare more consumer, you kind of got to make healthcare cool. And so one of the things I was thinking is, you know, in 2028, we have the ability to potentially have a great stage to showcase to young athletes or aspiring athletes, to people who have never seen the games broadcast because they never had a TV in Africa, but now they have a smartphone and they can watch coverage. How can we, I think the challenge there is how do we innovate in the next 11 years to take care of all, to try to tell the story better, I think, about what's happening at the games and do it in a way that's going to be very innovative. So I'm just curious on your thoughts on, how we got 10, 11 years. How do you think it's going to change, and how can we do that?
So at its core, the Olympics are all about the athletes and the, if you will, the pursuit of high performance by individuals against all odds, against challenges, and how do they do that? How do they learn enough to be able to be effective and efficient in the way they use their bodies? So it relates directly to how does technology give them better information? And the argument we made on behalf of our bid was we have the resources in this community to help athletes understand that, to perform better. But that can actually be a model for everybody. It's not just the high-performance athlete. It's every individual who thinks of the high-performance athlete benefiting from technology and information in a way that makes their life different. And if that can be applied to everybody so that the Olympic athlete is the model, that would be fantastic. Now, we know technology is going to give us more tools over the next 11 years so that we can get the message out more effectively. And everybody from Facebook to Snap to anybody else who's in the social media world. Alibaba is the other big new Olympic sponsor. These are people who have an interest in the same thing. And there is so much goodwill around the Olympic movement. If we can channel the goodwill effectively through the use of interesting technology, we want to stimulate that every way we can. And so our responsibility as the most switched on place in the world is to start generating ideas and actual experiences with the technology that we can apply not just to our Olympic Games, but to the Olympic Games which happened before ours. Remember, the way this works, the first Olympic Games coming up is the Winter Olympics in Pyeongchang, South Korea in February. Then Tokyo has the Summer Olympics in 2020. Beijing has the Winter Olympics in 2022. Paris will have the 2024 Summer Games. The 2026 Winter Games won't be determined for another year and a half or so, and then we'll have 28. But when you think about how the world is represented with principal cities, Tokyo, Beijing, Paris, Los Angeles, It's also great to think of Los Angeles being in the same caliber, in the same league with those great cities. And I think we both deserve it, but having that distinction means we've got a special responsibility. So it's a very, very interesting landscape.
Yeah, and then do you have any other?
Yeah, I mean, I just think one of the things we always think a lot about when we go into cultures and disrupt them, there are parts of them that work very well, and you don't want to lose the best of the culture. Some of the culture of the Olympics is the mystique of it and some of the mystery and then some of the personal stories. If we light it up too much, will we be taking some of that romanticism away? And that's why I think the storyteller part of it, we'll start to think probably in story with more data-driven. Our stories will become that. But did you get any pushback from more traditional IOC people with thinking that disruption could be bad?
Well, it's interesting. The IOC has invested a lot of money in something called the Olympic Channel. And I'm not sure how many of you have seen the Olympic Channel or understand what it is. Their original idea with the Olympic Channel was that it would be the platform whereby they would have athletes of all ages interact with each other around the Olympic theme. And they called it the Olympic Channel because the only thing they understand is broadcast, because that's what they do. The most effective thing the IOC does is to run the Olympic broadcast service, which actually produces all of the video at every Olympic Games. So even though we watch NBC, the video is actually produced by the IOC. And they're very, very good at it. Well, in reality, what they want is not a linear television channel, even though that's one dimension of this. They want a social media platform, or they want to be on other people's social media platforms, but to have a vigorous relationship with a wide range of people. And that's where this has to evolve. So this tension between the traditionalists, who are holding on to what they think has been the thing that has worked, and people pushing them to say, no, you got to change your approach. You have to move forward and release yourself a little bit from the binds of how this has worked in the past, is very much in evidence with the IOC.
You're such a diplomat.
That was the idea.
Thank you for getting the games. Diplomacy works. Do we have, and why did you take this on, Gene? It was a big, personally.
Well, I was recovering from having had lymphoma in 2015. I had lymphoma in 2014, was treated and everything is fine. But I was taking my recovery very seriously and hadn't decided to go back to work full time when Casey Wasserman called me and offered me the opportunity to do this. And I thought this was completely out of the blue, and I had to think just for a moment, did I really want to go back to work? But the idea of doing something around the Olympic and Paralympic Games was innately exciting. And I grew up here in Los Angeles. I was here for the '84 Games. And I must say the thing that's come back to me since taking this on is that everybody and anybody who was here for the '84 Games has a positive recollection of what it was like. From there was no traffic, which is what you hear an awful lot, to just the fact that we could be hosts for the entire world, the fact of seeing all of these things happening in our community at the same time. It's innately exciting. There are very few things in the world which are almost universally positive, and I think the Olympics and Paralympics has that potential. And so I felt this was a great project to get devoted to, and I think it will have great value for our community. So I'm very proud to have had a chance to do this and excited about the prospect of what's to come.
I have one more question about the, so how can, all the people in the room and all the companies that are working on different technologies, media companies, health companies, how can they work with you guys to do what you said? Because I know at Tastemade, for example, we are recreating how not just sports events or other types of events will be broadcast, but it is, to your point, it's very democratic in that we are covering it from every video we make, 7 different angles, 7 different languages, 7 different networks, and now 8 different languages. We're literally programming 8 different languages. So how do we, as companies, whether a media company, whether a technology company, work with LA 2028 to get involved? I think would be a question.
So we've been in a bid campaign mode with a relatively small team. We had 25 or 30 people and a lot of consultants who helped us plan where the actual events were going to be and how to move people around and things that require some technical input. We're in the process, right now of moving to the stage of being an organizing committee, which is the formal name given to the group that's responsible for the games. But I think we're going to be quite open to engaging with the community very broadly. And we want to do two things. One is receive input so we can do things ourselves and encourage people to do things themselves. Now we can say the reality is Los Angeles will be the host of the 2028 Olympic and Paralympic Games. And it's not so much that we're licensing the community to do things the community wants to do, but we are virtually going to do that. And there shouldn't be a limit on creativity or imagination. There are 1,000 Olympic athletes who live in Southern California. People like Allison Felix or Janet Evans, who is also a USC alum, who is the head of our athletes commission. We had 100 of them actively engaged in our process. I think we had 75 or 80 come to the city council twice when the city council voted unanimously to accept the responsibility for the host city contract, whereby the city stands behind our efforts. So there is a lot of content that is in the community that will only get excited by the prospect of the games. So on the one hand, I want to say we'll do things with you, but we're a small team. On the other hand, there are lots of Olympians out there, historic Olympians like John Neighbor, who's also a USC alum, who was a great swimmer in 1976. So there is just a tremendous wealth of capability, interest, and focus in our community, and I think it's all available.
Let's say thank you to Gene Sykes and all of the efforts that you're for LA 2028.